The prairie breathed dust and silence. Evening light spread across the land in a long amber sigh, painting the mesas in bruised red and purple. Wind carried the smell of iron-rich dirt and dry sage, the kind of scent that stuck to a man's throat, as if the earth itself wanted to remind him of its hunger. A lone rider moved slowly along the ridgeline, his outline jagged against the dying sun. His coat was worn near to threads, his boots cracked with age, his rifle strapped across the saddle, as if welded in by years of necessity rather than pride. He did not ride like a man on a journey, but like one returning to a place that had forgotten him. The town he approached was little more than a gathering of buildings clinging to the edges of survival. Plank-sided saloon, crooked sheriff's office, a few stores, homes stitched together with mud and hope. As he rode closer, children paused in their games to stare, mothers pulled him back to porches, and men at the water trough stiffened like dogs catching the scent of a wolf. He tipped his hat, but no one raised a hand. He could feel it, the way they saw him not as a neighbor, not even as a stranger, but as something older, a shadow drifting back into flesh. He tied his horse outside the saloon and pushed through its doors. The smell of whiskey, sweat, and kerosene lamps folded around him. Music had been playing, a tinny piano tune, but it faltered as if the keys themselves hesitated. Only the crackle of the stove filled the silence. Behind the bar stood a woman with hair tied back and eyes that did not lower when he entered. Her face bore lines carved more by grief than years, and her hands, resting on the counter, were strong enough to snap a bottleneck clean off. "You look like a man chasing ghosts," she said, voice steady, without the flattery or fear most bartenders lace their greetings with. "Or running from them," he answered, setting a coin down for a drink. His voice was rough, as though every word scraped across gravel. She poured the whiskey, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. "Plenty of both types pass through. Which kind are you?" He drank before replying, the burn dragging memories he would rather bury to the surface. Faces in mud, comrades left behind, orders barked by men who never fired a shot themselves. He placed the glass down gently, as if setting down a grave marker. "Doesn't matter. I don't plan to stay." The doors creaked open, and 3 men stepped in, spurs jangling like warning bells. Their coats carried the dust of long rides, and their eyes the impatience of men sent to do another's dirty work. They looked at him, then at the woman, and one muttered, "Thought he was dead." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The stranger finished his drink and stood, his shadow stretching across the floorboards toward them. He did not reach for his rifle, nor did they, though the air thickened until even the piano strings seemed to vibrate with tension. One of them spat and said, "Dead men should stay buried." Then they turned and left, boots scuffing against wood, leaving the promise of trouble hanging heavy in their wake. The woman leaned closer, her voice low. Who are they afraid of? He studied her, as if weighing whether her question was meant as kindness or trap. His lips pulled into something between a smile and a wince. A man who should have been left on the battlefield. That's all. Later, when he stepped back into the street, the last streak of daylight had vanished, leaving lanterns to fight the dark. He walked slow, boots scuffing against the packed dirt. Whispers followed him, men leaning on posts, women glancing from behind curtains. He caught fragments, trader, butcher, curse. Yet none spoke loud enough for him to hear full truth. Only the land seemed willing to give voice, groaning under the weight of an oncoming storm. At the edge of town he paused, gazing out where the prairie dissolved into shadow. He had hoped the world had forgotten his name. The way those men looked at him told him otherwise. The past was not buried. It was stalking him step for step. A child's voice broke the silence behind him. "Mister, are you a soldier?" He turned. A boy stood clutching a wooden toy horse, eyes wide, not yet taught to fear the way adults had. For a moment, the man almost said his name, the one the army once used, the one etched in blood and dishonor, but he swallowed it, shaking his head. "No medals here, kid. Just a man passing through." The boy nodded solemnly, as if accepting a secret, before running back toward the light of the houses. The soldier, though he refused a word, watched him go, a flicker of something old and painful stirring in his chest. He could leave tonight, ride out before dawn, disappear into the silence again. But he knew, deep down, the men who entered that saloon would not let him vanish. They were not after Malone. The town, the land, perhaps even the boy, trouble would swallow them all. He stood in the wind, coat pulling tight around him, the dark horizon flashing with distant lightning. The storm would break soon, and when it did, he understood he could not keep riding forever. Some ghost demanded a reckoning. Rain came in the night, sudden and heavy, hammering the roofs until the streets ran slick and the dust became mud. The storm rattled shutters and sent stray dogs scurrying for shelter, but the soldier lay awake on the cot in the boarding house, staring at the ceiling as water dripped steadily into a pan. The storm outside matched the storm within, memories rising in fragments too jagged to form a whole. A field drowned in mud, shouts lost beneath cannon fire. Many had promised a lead, swallowed by silence before their boots could find solid ground. He closed his eyes, but sleep refused him. At dawn, the sky cleared, washed pale as bone. He stepped outside, moving through streets where puddles reflected the fragile calm. Folks avoided his eyes now, as if his presence might invite ruin. He carried the weight of their stares like another weapon strapped across his back. It was not new. He had worn that weight since the war ended. A man without a medal, without glory, without even the decency of being forgotten. Near the edge of town, he found the healer. She sat cross-legged in the dirt, grinding herbs in a clay bowl, her long braid glistening with rain. Her skin carried the hue of two worlds, settler blood and native blood both. Children hovered around her, their parents watching from a distance, suspicious but unable to deny her medicine when fevers came. She looked up as he approached, her eyes sharp, measuring, as though she could read not only the body but the heart. "You carry wounds you never cleaned," she said, not rising. He thought of the scar along his ribs, the shrapnel lodged too deep for surgeons. But he knew she meant more than flesh. Some wounds ain't meant to close, even if they kill you. He crouched down, hands resting on his knees. "If they kill me, maybe that's the closing." Her mouth tightened, yet there was no pity in her gaze, only recognition. You fight shadows like they're enemies, but shadows fight back. He did not answer. Instead, he watched her mix leaves into a paste, the smell bitter and alive. There was calm in her work, a rhythm that belonged to neither side of the borderlands, but to something older. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest pull of kinship. She belonged nowhere, same as him. The peace fractured when riders came down the road at noon. 6 of them, dust still flying from their coats. Their leader was tall, with a trim mustache and a polished revolver on his hip, the kind of man who had never known hunger or mud, who carried himself like land and lives were debts owed to him. They dismounted in front of the saloon, voices carrying with easy arrogance. "Railroads coming through," one declared, loud enough for the town to hear. "This place is standing in the way." The soldier leaned against the post outside the healer's hut, listening. His gut told him everything. Men like these did not announce themselves unless they were certain no one dared resist. He watched townsfolk shrink back, some bowing their heads, others pretending not to hear. The saloon woman stepped into the street, apron still tied, hands clenched at her sides. "We built this place," she said. "We ain't moving because some company draws lines on a map." The leader smiled, a polished thing, colder than a knife. "You'll move one way or another." The soldier shifted, ready to step forward, but the healer touched his arm. Her voice was quiet, meant only for him. "If you show your hand now, you'll burn this town faster than they ever could." He froze, jaw tightening. She was right. He had felt it the moment those men walked in. They already knew who he was, or at least the kind of man. To act now would be to give them proof. And yet standing idle, watching them grind fear into these people, scraped his bones raw. Later, when the riders left with threats hanging like storm clouds, he found the woman at the saloon stacking bottles that no one would drink. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Why didn't you draw? You got the eyes of a man who's killed before." "Because they wanted me to," he said. Finally, she turned, anger and curiosity fighting in her face. "Then what are you waiting for? For them to burn us out?" He thought of the boy with the wooden horse, of the healer's steady hands, of the whispers in the streets that named him curse and butcher. I'm waiting for something worth staying for. That night, the three of them, soldier, healer, and woman, sat at a rough-hewn table lit by one lantern. The silence was heavy, but it was not empty. The healer broke it first. These people will be slaughtered if someone doesn't stand for them. The woman's voice was softer now, though steel still ran beneath it. And you think he's the one? The whole town believes he's a walking grave. I believe he's tired of graves, the healer said. The soldier stared into the flame, letting it blur, letting it remind him of the fields where fire had swallowed everything once before. His throat felt tight, but he forced the words out. I don't have medals. Don't have a flag. All I got is what's left of me. Maybe that's enough. The woman studied him, and though doubt still lingered, something shifted in her eyes. She saw not just a ruin of a man, but the possibility of a shield, however broken. Outside, thunder grumbled again in the distance, as if the land itself knew what was coming. The railroad men would return, and when they did, it would not be with words. For the first time since he had ridden into town, the soldier felt the faint outline of a choice shaping in front of him. He could leave tonight and spare himself to fight, or he could stay and turn his ghosts loose against men who thought the land could be bought with ink and guns. The lantern flame flickered, shadows stretching across their faces, binding them in fragile alliance. The storm was not yet here, but it was close enough to taste, and none of them would meet it unchanged. The canyon walls glowed red in the afternoon light, jagged stone rising like the ribs of some ancient beast. The soldier rode at the edge of a wagon train, watching dust coil upward in weary spirals. Families clung to their possessions, eyes darting at every echo that rolled through the rocks. He could feel the ambush before it happened. The silence of birds, the stillness of the wind. His hand slid to the rifle strapped across his saddle. The crack of gunfire shattered the air. Bullets struck wood and flesh alike, screams blending with the shrill cries of terrified horses. Mercenaries poured from the ridges above, rifles blazing, faces hidden behind scarves. The soldier spurred forward, firing into the rocks, his voice raw as he shouted for the wagons to wheel. Dust rose thick, choking, as chaos consumed the narrow pass. He saw a woman fall, clutching her child, and without thought he threw himself into the storm, dragging them beneath an overturned cart as splinters rained. His blood boiled with the memory of other battles, other betrayals. The canyon echoed like those fields long ago, where he had been ordered to hold ground that was never meant to be saved. Men had died to buy time for profit, not victory. He had carried their screams ever since. But today he swore each shot he fired way different. He shot with rage, with guilt, with a stubborn refusal to let this ambush be another chapter in the ledger of forgotten names. The fight bled into silence as quickly as it had begun. The mercenaries retreated, leaving bodies and broken wagons in their wake. Survivors huddled together, shaking, whispering thanks that felt more like accusations. The soldier stood over the wreckage, heart pounding, each dead face another stone added to the wall, already crushing him. The healer moved among the wounded, her hands steady even as blood painted them. She met his eyes across the chaos and shook her head, not in blame but in grim recognition. The woman from the saloon, rifle in hand, had fought beside him, and though her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes burned with resolve. They buried the fallen in shallow graves carved into the canyon floor. The soldier said no prayers. He had none left. When the last mound was covered, a deputy from town appeared at the ridge, his badge catching the light. His horse snorted, restless, as if it knew betrayal carried a stench. "You led them into this," the deputy said, his voice carrying for all to hear. "Every man here knows your kind. War, butcher, deserter, whatever name you carry. Death follows you." The words struck harder than bullets. The soldier's jaw clenched, his hand flexing against the butt of his revolver, but he did not draw. The deputy's face was hard, but not cruel for its own sake. It was the face of a man cornered by promises whispered in gold and land. "They'll burn the town," the deputy continued, "unless we give them what they want. And what they want is you. Best thing you can do is leave and take your curse with you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, desperate for a scapegoat. Others looked away, ashamed. The soldier felt the noose tightening, the choice shrinking until all that remained was exile or destruction. The woman spat in the dirt, anger sharp in her voice. He fought for us while you were behind law that bends to the highest bidder. The deputy's eyes flickered with something close to regret, but he turned his horse and rode off without reply. Dust swallowed him, leaving silence and suspicion heavy in his wake. That night, the three of them camped beyond the canyon. A fire burned low, rain threatening once more in the distance. The healers sat cross-legged, mixing salves for the wounded who had followed them. The woman cradled a rifle across her knees, staring into the flames as if daring them to falter. The soldier sat apart, staring at the stars that pierced the dark like old scars. He spoke, voice low, almost to himself. Back in the war, we were told to hold a ridge. No supplies, no hope of rescue. They sent us there because the papers needed a story, because generals needed their medals. We died for words and a ledger. I lived. That was my sin. The healer's gaze lifted from her bowl. Survival is not sin. It is when every man who trusted me stayed in the dirt, he said. His hands trembled as he clenched them, as though trying to hold back ghosts. The woman finally turned toward him, her voice rough but steady. You can't drag the dead back to life, but you can keep the living from joining them. For a moment, he almost gave them his name, the name that history had spat out, buried in dishonor. It hovered at the edge of his tongue, but the fire cracked, and he swallowed it back. Names don't matter in the dirt, he muttered. The healer studied him with an intensity that seemed to pierce bone. Then perhaps it's time to build something that does. The crack of thunder rolled across the sky, low and heavy. They looked at the horizon where lightning split the clouds. The railroad's ultimatum had arrived earlier that day, vacate or burn. The company's men would march soon, with more rifles, more fire, more certainty that fear alone would clear the land. The soldier stood, pulling his coat tight against the wind. His silhouette loomed dark against the firelight, a man caught between flight and fight. He could feel the choice pressing down on him, heavier than any rifle. He turned to the two who had stood by him despite the whispers, despite the stain of his past. If they want ghosts, he said, voice cold as the wind whipping through the canyon, I'll give them ghosts. The fire popped, sending sparks skyward, as though the earth itself answered his vow. The healer nodded once, firm, her braids swinging against her back. The woman's hand tightened on the rifle, her jaw set. Together, in the fragile shelter of night, they bound themselves to a promise not written in law or medals, but in grit and necessity. The storm was coming, and when it broke, none of them would remain the same. Dawn came with a silence that was almost cruel. The prairie stretched wide and waiting, the grass silver by dew, the horizon a bruise of dark clouds pressing low. In that breathless stillness, the town gathered. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, rifles in their hands, though many had never fired one in anger. Children were carried away to the safety of cellars, their eyes wide with questions no parent dared answer. The soldier walked among them, his presence both a shadow and a shield, his coat heavy with rain, yet his gaze unwavering. He felt the weight of their fear pressing into him, and beneath it, the old guilt clawing to drag him down. But today the ghost would not lead him. Today he would lead them. The ground trembled first, faint and distant, then grew into the steady thunder of hooves. The railroad's hired guns appeared over the ridge, dark shapes against the rising light, banners of dust curling behind them. At their head rode the mustached man, polished revolver gleaming as though meant for ceremony rather than blood. He carried himself as if the land already belonged to him, as if the people before him were obstacles rather than lives. You've had your chance, the man called, his voice rolling across the square. Stand aside and the company will show mercy. The soldier stepped forward, his boots sinking into the damp earth. Mercy's just another word you sell, he said, voice low but carrying. This land's been fed enough on promises and graves. A murmur rippled to the gathered townsfolk, a fragile spark of courage lit by his defiance. The woman at his side raised her rifle, her eyes narrowed with a fury sharpened by years of loss. The healer moved quietly among the defenders, placing a hand on trembling shoulders, whispering words that steadied hearts. Together they stood, a ragged line against a tide of polished steel. The first shot cracked like the sky breaking open. Gunfire exploded in waves, the square filling with smoke and screams. Horses reared, bullets ricocheted off stone. Windows shattered in violent shards. The soldier moved like a man born to battle. Each step precise, each shot carrying the weight of memory and resolve. He saw men fall, friends, strangers, and the fire in his chest roar hotter, refusing to let their deaths be hollow. The mercenaries pressed forward, setting torches to rooftops, the smell of burning wood and pitch smothering the air. Flames climbed the saloon walls, casting the woman in a savage glow as she gunned down a rider charging through the smoke. Her hand shook, but her aim was true. The deputy appeared then, his badge glinting as he shouted for order, for surrender. His voice wavered, caught between loyalty and fear. "Law is the only thing keeping you alive," he cried, even as mercenaries cut down townsfolk at his back. The woman turned her rifle on him, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "Then your law can burn with them." Her shot rang out, striking him square. He staggered, clutching his chest, eyes wide not with anger but with a sorrow he had never dared show. He fell to the mud, badge sinking with him, swallowed by the storm he had chosen. The soldier fought through the blaze, his coat smoldering, his body driven by something beyond flesh. He reached the heart of the square where the mustached leader dismounted, revolver drawn, face twisted in disdain. The two men faced one another through the chaos, a silence carved in the eye of a storm. "You're no savior," the leader sneered. "You're a relic, a ghost choking on the past." The soldier leveled his rifle, eyes hard as the land itself. "Maybe, but ghosts don't bow." They clashed in a flurry of shots and fists, the fight savage, stripped of elegance. The revolver clattered to mud, the rifle splintered against stone. They grappled like men who knew only one would walk away. The soldier, breath ragged, drove the man back against the burning wall. With final thrust he struck, and the leader crumpled, blood mixing with rain and ash. Around them, the mercenaries faltered. Without command, their unity broke, some fleeing into the prairie, others cut down by townsfolk who refused to yield. The storm cracked above, lightning splitting the sky as if marking the moment. The soldier stood, swaying, smoke curling around him like a shroud. He looked back to the healer, who knelt beside a wounded child, her hand steady though her face was streaked with soot. He looked at the woman, her rifle hanging limp at her side, eyes wide with grief and fire. For an instant, he felt the pull of life again, the fragile thread of belonging. But he knew the truth. The town would rise from this night, but only if he did not remain to anchor them in memory of blood. The mercenary's blade had found him in the struggle. He could feel the warmth spreading beneath his coat. His knees buckled, yet he forced himself upright, gripping the rifle's broken stock like a banner. "To the edge of the world," he said, voice hoarse. "They'll say we stood." The woman stepped forward, reaching as if to hold him, but he shook his head. The healer's eyes glistened, understanding dawning in her silence. With one last breath, he turned toward the burning square, his silhouette framed by fire and storm. Then he fell, not with a scream, but with the quiet resolve of a man who had given all he had left. The town did not fall. The flames were beaten back. The mercenaries scattered, the storm washing soot into thirsty earth. Survivors gathered in the square, their faces etched with loss and defiance. The woman stood among them, her voice unsteady yet strong. He asked for no name. "So let's give him this. We remember." The healer knelt where the soldier had fallen, planting her hand against the soil as though sealing a pact with the land itself. Rain pattered against her braid, against the graves already dug in her memory. The earth whispered back, not in words when the silence left behind, a silence that promised to hold his story even if no book ever would. When the storm passed, dawn broke again, clean and merciless. The town was scarred but standing. Children climbed from cellars, their eyes finding the sky as though it had been remade. The woman gathered them close, her voice steadying. The healer walked the square, touching shoulders, binding wounds. Together they stitched what could be saved. And in the wind that swept across the prairie, there lingered a presence. Not a name, not a monument, but feeling carved deep as the canyons. No medals, No glory, just guts. And the soldier history had tried to erase remained, carried not by stone or ink, but by those who lived because he had stayed to fight.